Kyle.
Pat?
My name's Pat Boyd. I'm a building official, and this is?
My name is Kyle Wynot. I'm also a building official.
And today we're here to do another inspection. And what type of inspection are we doing today, Kyle?
Pat, today we're going to be looking at a foundation inspection.
Perfect. So before we head over, let's get our safety gear on. So what are we going to need today for this one, Kyle?
Today we'll put on our hard hats.
Perfect. Anything else we need? Are we good to go?
I think we're good to go for now.
Perfect. Let's get started.
All right.
All right, Kyle, let's see what we got and what we're looking at today.
Okay. So we're looking at a foundation today. We'll take a few minutes here to look at the file and see if there was any outstanding documents or deficiencies noted in the last inspection.
Okay, and do we have any that we need to look at today while we're here?
I'm not seeing any deficiencies. However, we do need to see if we have the location certificate as well as the geotechnical report for this project.
What do we need that for?
So the geotechnical report is required whenever a site has infill or is not on undisturbed soil. So in this case here, this building is sitting on top of infill, so we want to make sure that it was done correctly.
Yeah. And we asked for that the last time we were here when we reviewed the footings, correct?
That's right. Yeah,
Perfect.
Exactly.
All right. So here we are. This is what we're going to be looking at today. So what are some of the things you notice right off the bat here, Kyle, approaching this one?
So first thing that I noticed when we pulled in here, Pat, is that we have a conventional concrete foundation in place. There's some damp proofing on it. It looks like there may be a drain tile in place there. So I kind of look at the overall site just to kind of see what's going on. I see we've got some piles of rock in the background, potentially for the backfill. We'll have a closer look at that though as we go.
Okay, let's get that a little closer. Maybe you can point out too that we talked about a little bit earlier about like that geotech report that we requested. Can you just explain a little bit of why that was again?
Yeah, so like we mentioned earlier, the geotech is required because of the fact that this site has infill in place, and you can see it here in this surge rock.
Yep, this is what they call it right here, right? This stuff there.
Yeah, exactly. So the foundation, the footings are not resting directly on undisturbed soil. Right. It's sitting on top of this rock.
Right. And we have to make sure that this can support the building.
Exactly.
So that's why we get our geotech engineer.
Exactly.
Perfect. What else are you noticing as we go, or what else do we look for as we do our inspection?
So Pat, we should probably take the time to look at the depth of the foundation to make sure that there's adequate frost protection for this foundation.
And how can we tell by that just by looking here today?
So at a quick glance, you can tell by the height of the damp proofing on the wall. So what we typically do...
You're referring to this, right? You're referring to this line here.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So what we typically do is we'll take a measurement, if needed, from the base of the footing up to that line to determine whether or not it's going to be frost protected or not.
Yeah. And what's the requirement for frost protection? What's the depth?
So 4 feet or 1.2 meters.
Right on. So from your point of view, is there anything along here that you would take note of or inspect?
So I think now we should take a moment to look at the condition of the concrete itself.
Okay.
So the foundation wall itself.
Okay, and what are we looking for when we look at the concrete?
So kind of similar idea to when we look at the footings. We want to look at the height of the wall itself, the thickness of the wall, as well as the condition of the concrete itself, to make sure that there's no honeycombing, as we mentioned with the footing stage, and make sure there's no cracks or any structural issues with the wall itself.
Yeah. Why are we looking at the height?
So height, again, would be because of getting that proper frost protection depth. Mm-hmm. So that would be one of them. Another one would be because of the height of the wall being, there's a height
limit,
requirement.
Right?
There's a limit on that.
To the height. Yeah.
Exactly. So we want to make sure that it meets those requirements.
Yeah. And the reason it's to the light, and the height is, just because the higher that concrete wall, the more pressure is assumed on it, right? So once it hits the maximum height in the building code, they'll want it an engineer design for it, right? So it doesn't fail or crack or push in.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect. So the honeycomb was the stuff we talked about with the footing, and then again, we also talked about cold joints, and I don't see any cold joints here. But no, it looks pretty good. It looks like a pretty good pour. There's a little bit of honeycomb right there in the corner, but other than that, it looks good. So now what are we looking for? Anything else looking for the condition of the concrete?
So another thing we can look at is the ties that hold the forms together.
Okay.
So here we can see that where these black spots are here, that's where the ties would have been for the forms.
Right.
We want to make sure that those are broken off, the tabs are broken off, and that they're sealed up with the damp proofing.
Right on. So there's like a little extra daub of what I call tar, but it's roof cement, whatever you want to call it. That's a little extra precaution as opposed to the coating of damp proofing, right?
Exactly.
Just a little extra. And the reason I think they want this is because that's a penetration for water. They want to damp proof it, make sure no water gets from here into there.
So Pat, it looks like, so we have a conventional concrete foundation here. What other types of foundations
Yeah,
are
so
there?
this is what they call a typical foundation that most everybody recognizes. It's an 8-inch concrete wall on concrete footings. So out there nowadays, there's other ways, depending on conditions, cost, and money, that they can do other foundations. So some of them foundations are an engineered design, which is basically an integral footing on a slab that's just straight across. It doesn't go down, and the engineer will design frost protection for it. There's ICF. So ICF is basically insulation covered Lego blocks, right? People put them together, stack them up, fill them full of concrete, and that's their foundation. That is some generic engineering done to them basically by the manufacturer. And then we have, so to speak, pier foundations, and these come in a bunch of different styles. These particular ones are actually for a deck. But this is considered a foundation, so the deck will sit on 4 feet below frost, which is from here to the bottom of the footing, right? So that's 4 feet frost protection. There's other type of ones like this. There's plastic ones, they call them Bigfoot is the manufacturer name of one. There's auger piles, which they screw into the ground. So there's many different types. All of them are a little bit different, but they all accomplish the same thing. They're supposed to support a load, and they're supposed to have frost protection.
And you can also have precast.
Precast,
in these as well.
Yep. Good point. Yep, there is a precast one that they do at a plant. They just bring over and plunk down. Absolutely. The other thing over here too, Kyle will point out, is you'll see there's what we call a check in the foundation wall. So there is code requirements that govern what you can do and what you can't do here. It's mostly to hold the floor. This particular one is just for aesthetics. What they're going to do is pour this slab and they're going to bring it over to here. So this is generally when you see something like this, it's on the outside, and it's called a brick check. And what people use that for is to support the brick veneer, the small little bricks that make your house look red, gray, whatever the style of brick. So usually that's on the outside, but then it's called a brick check. It supports the brick.
And I guess what we're seeing here, Pat, right now with the foam on the inside of that check is just a thermal break from the floor to the wall itself.
Yeah, so it's just a little bit of a thermal break. So you can see here, there's a piece out here that there's about 2.5 inches of foam insulation there. So that'll create a little bit of thermal break. And typically what will happen is the slab will be poured up against to this. There'll be another probably piece put here when they're doing their slab. Dun, 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 dun! All right, it's getting warm out, Kyle. I'm gonna take my jacket off. We're inside the foundation now. What particularly are we looking at for in here?
So kind of like we did on the outside of the foundation, we want to look at the condition of the concrete. Again, with ties, we want to make sure that the ties were snapped off. You can see them there in the wall. We'll take a little closer look at those.
Yep. These little spots here.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
And just the overall condition of the concrete, we want to make sure it looks good. There's no structural issues with it, any cold joints, that sort of stuff.
Honeycombing, cracks, the whole bit.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Anything else in the concrete wall we're going to be looking at?
So, Pat, I notice over here in this corner that we have a penetration through the concrete wall, or otherwise known as a sleeve through the wall.
Yeah. So this little piece of pipe here that was stuck in the form before it was poured?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So it looks like, just from looking outside of the foundation there, that this one here will be for the sewer line out to the septic system.
Yeah. So what's the biggest reason that we're a little concerned about the penetrations in the walls?
Well, we want to make sure that that there's no water infiltration through that area. We want to make sure that there's no concrete that didn't get around the pipe there to cause structural issues, as well as water getting in around that.
So that becomes more important in a case like this, where we know the floor is going to be about here. So we know that penetration is above the floor.
Exactly.
So if water were to come in and whatever finishes they have in this lovely home, it would be damaged and compromised.
While we're here, we could talk about the anchor bolts.
Okay.
I see there's some anchor bolts here in place, as well as a nailer on the concrete itself right here.
Yeah, so when you talk about a nailer, this little piece of wood that's embedded in the concrete, what do you think they're using that for?
Typically what they use those for is to nail their bottom plate of the wall. That'll be the wooden wall that's going to go above this. They'll nail it to that.
So that would be in addition to the anchor bolts, because the anchor bolts do, so to speak.
Exactly. The anchor
same
bolts
thing,
are
right?
are literally anchoring the wall to the concrete.
Yeah.
And the nailer strip there, it basically, they kind of do the same thing.
Yeah. Some of the code requirements for the anchor bolts are basically that they have to be a 1/2 inch in diameter. So that's the thickness, obviously. They do have to project up a certain amount. I believe it's 4 inches up through. They also have to have a J hook on them. So when that's embedded in the concrete, it's not just a straight shaft. It goes down and turns like this, so that you can't pull it out. So it gives that extra force. The spacing is also required, right? So the spacing on these is typically what you would see is about 1.2 meters or 4 feet. But the code does allow a little bit more room for spacing, but typically they'll put them in about every 4 feet just to cover their bases. They also have to be at stops and starts on corners, right? So you'll see stops and starts on corners, there's usually 2. So this one here has plenty. Looks like they're okay.
Yeah.
So Kyle, I noticed while we're in here, I see all this white styrofoam on a certain section of the foundation. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, there is, Pat. So that insulation is put in place for efficiency reasons, energy efficiency reasons.
Yeah, so it stops the cold from penetrating outside to inside, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it just helps keep your floor a little bit warmer.
Exactly, and it's a good thing to note on this inspection, because it may not get seen at subsequent inspection.
Just make a note that it was here.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they don't have to go fishing for it later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else inside here while we're here worth noting or commenting on?
Yeah, so we have some strip footings here that you can see.
Okay, yeah.
We talked about those at the footing inspection. However, it's a good to note them again, that they...
So we're talking about this little guy right here.
Yeah, exactly.
And another one over there.
Yep. So it's good to note that they don't go all the way out to the foundation wall because of their height from the original footings there. So good to note it, so that in subsequent inspections we can see that either they've filled this area in and poured that out to the foundation wall, or that they've beamed over this in the framing inspection.
Yeah, and usually what happens is we will see this in the footing inspection report, that this section was not poured at the time they did the footing. So we're checking now just to follow up to see if they completed it later. It's still not completed, so now they're probably either going to complete it later or put a structural beam in to carry the floor, the load from above. Well, Kyle, I noticed something here, and maybe you can help me out with, is we noticed that the damp proofing kind of stops right here. Is there any reason why that stopped there, or they just ran out and this is a deficiency, or what's the issue?
Well, it kind of looks like that, doesn't it, Pat?
Yeah.
But that's actually correct the way they have it done there.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because the floor level inside, the concrete floor that'll be sitting in here, is higher than what the grade will be on the outside of the building. Therefore, the damp proofing is not necessarily required because there's not going to be no chance of water getting in above the floor on the inside.
Right on. So in other words, it doesn't matter if this leaks through because the floor is up here. Anything that leaks through is going to be out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we should probably touch on the fact that the damp proofing, as you can see here on this wall, it contours down the wall, it slopes down the wall. And the reason for that is because it only needs to be where the grade is going to, where the finished grade is going to end.
Right.
So in this case, you can see it's going to follow that damp proofing down the wall.
So typically this dividing line between the black and the gray concrete is typically roughly where they think the
finished
grade or the mud's going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the backfill, as it were.
Yeah.
And speaking of backfill, what are we noticing about the stuff that may be laying around here that they're going to use to put back in?
Well, Pat, so you can see back here on the back side of the house that there's large piles of rock here and backfill and boulders and things that they dug out of this site. Some of it has been trucked in, as you can see there, kind of what we've seen here underneath.
For the pad, right?
For the pad, yeah. So we want to make sure that none of these boulders and none of this big rock ends up against the foundation.
Yeah, and why is that important? What does a big rock do against the foundation?
So what it will do is, as it settles, it's going to scrape down the sides of the foundation wall, and it could scrape off this damp proofing that you see here in this particular case. In the case of like an ICF foundation wall, where you have a membrane on the wall, it can pull and tear at that and cause water issue down the road.
Yeah, I think one of the other items that they are looking for too, or don't allow the bigger rocks. So the code requirement is for basically no boulder or rock bigger than 10 inches in diameter.
Yeah.
Up against within 2 feet of this wall, right? So it has to stay back. And what happens is there's potentially a frost pressure that pushes it and creates a pressure point, and it can actually push it against the foundation wall and crack it.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, the water will get in and you'll maybe have a little structural compromise.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have to make sure that none of this ends up within the 2 feet from the wall, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, so we'll just reiterate that in the inspection report and just basically say nothing bigger than 10 inches within 2 feet of the foundation wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the last things I think we haven't looked at yet is the gravel or the drain tile, or the foundation drain that supposedly could be around this building.
Yeah, so just by looking at what we have here for rock up against the foundation wall, I assume that there is a foundation drain here. So what we could do too is pull a bit of this rock back.
Yep, and there it is.
Yeah, so there's the foundation drain right there, known as a drain tile or a weeping tile.
And what are some of the requirements around that? What are the specifications that they got to do here?
So the drain tile typically lays next to the footing, at the base of the footing, and then you need to have a drainage plane around that. So in this case they have rock, small rock that they put over it, and it needs to be about 6 inches of coverage over that.
At least 6, right?
At least 6 inches of coverage over that.
Right on. So in the location of it is next to the footing as you indicate it. It's typically what you see.
Yeah.
But there's a requirement of it to be at least there. It can't be above the floor inside.
That's right, exactly.
It has to be at least no higher than that, than the floor inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good point to make, is that in a foundation where the entire floor is going to be higher than the footing itself, that there's not necessarily a requirement to have a drain tile in place.
Yeah, but for the most cases, people put them in regardless. But actually, the surge here actually looks like a good drainage plane anyway. But,
yeah.
So they chose to put it in, and I think that's a good thing. Is there anything else you can think of that we might have missed or didn't talk about?
So we should probably talk about, we had talked about the drain tile itself, but maybe we should talk about the termination of that drain tile.
So what are the typical requirements for termination of the drain tile?
So typically they will end, or they'll move away from the foundation at the lowest point of the foundation. It looks like in this case it would be down in that back corner, or that corner, one of those two corners. And it needs to slope away from the building.
Yeah. And where can it terminate? Where's all the water going?
So that all that water needs to drain away and into, typically they go out into like a rock pit or something of that nature.
Or a ditch maybe, or a slope of a hill, right? Yeah, so it's just where the water, the whole point is to get the water away from the foundation. And you can see, if you get real close, you can see that there's kind of a little ditch that heads back that way. So you're right, typically that's where it would be terminated.
So Pat, today's another gorgeous day out. Is there anything else that we should be looking at here with this foundation?
Yeah, I think one of the things worth mentioning is basically the weather, as you say. So today's a really nice day, so there's no extra protection that the concrete would have needed. So typically if it's a cold day below 5 degrees Celsius, then there's a requirement at least to keep the concrete from freezing, right? So maybe some of the other conditions too, there could have been some standing water in here too that would have had to been removed before backfilling.
Yeah.
So other than that, I think we got it all.
Perfect.
Let's head up and let's get their report done. All right, we finished it up, Kyle. So now we're going to move on to getting the report done. What was your take on the whole inspection? Where are we at with it?
So we didn't note any deficiencies on the site while we were there.
All right.
So we want to make sure that that's captured in the report, that we didn't find any deficiencies. Any of the other items that we talked about that we want to note, like the insulation on the foundation wall, those types of things, the strip footings,
the backfill.
We want to make those notes on there so that any the next inspector coming on site will be able to see those notes.
And what are we going to do with the report?
So there's a couple of different scenarios. Some municipalities will do paper copies and leave one on site, keep one in their file. Some municipalities do electronic iPad copies now. Everything's electronic, so they'll go into an electronic file and a copy gets emailed off to the contractor and the property owner.
All right, so the gist of it, as long as they get the proper information so they can move forward, and we're good to go.
Exactly.
All right, Kyle, that finishes up this one. Let's get our safety gear back off, our hard hats, put our good, nice little hats on, and we'll call it a day.
All right, sounds good. On to the next one.
Perfect.